All right, hello everyone. We're back, and for a Thursday episode, and it's another transatlantic experience, with our good friend Fred. Um, Fred, I hope we're happy to have you. I know it's late for you, so we appreciate you taking time out of your evening. Um,
It's all right. It's all right.
I mean, this time of
Um,
year in England is probably pretty dark, so maybe there's not a whole lot of other things to do. So maybe it's maybe it's more exciting than I think it is.
it's it's very dark, and recently it started getting cold and foggy, and it's started to get quite wintry. But it's also there's also some charm about that. I do like a bit of fog sometimes. I think it's quite uh well, it has a nice aesthetic to it.
Oh
But
yes, very
it's
much
we've
so.
started to get quite a chill recently. Yeah.
Yeah, it actually snowed up here in the Great Pacific Northwest, so which is weird for this time of year. So yeah, it looks to be a cold one over here. So well,
We don't tend to get snow until the new year for some
oh
reason.
yeah,
We don't have snowy Decembers, but we just get uncomfortable chills.
yeah. Well, you don't have
Yeah,
mountains like we do, not like we do. So
we have a few, but not many.
come
No.
on. Anyhow, but we're not here today actually to debate the various geographies of our respective regions. We're here to talk about liberalism.
Well,
Um,
we might end up talking about geography in relation to the topic.
yes, yes,
Possibly.
quite possibly.
Yes.
And I guess because this is on the YouTube, I guess I'll say we're here. You have this idea that you had sort of, I think it was just in one of our chats or something like that. You had mentioned it before, and I kind of put a pin in that because like that's an interesting idea. I want to come back to that, and that's of a form of liberalism that is, let's say, grounded and sanguine. Um, uh
Sure.
Liberalism, maybe I think your example you had brought out was sort of Switzerland, right? Like a liberalism
Sure.
that is very much set in a place inside a particular culture, and that maybe could potentially be a somewhat of a solution, or maybe not even a solution, another option to the very kind of globalist liberalism that I think both of our respective countries are very much experiencing, and I would probably add suffering from. So
Sure.
maybe that's the best intro
Well,
I can give. So
sure. So yeah, my way of thinking about it is that um well, so this thing called liberalism exists, and these days it's in a particular form of it that it's obviously changed its form as to what its sort of underlying definitive characteristics are over the last couple of centuries. So we're in a particular, I don't think a final form, or maybe a final form, some sort of late form of liberalism.
this is very
But
anime here. Yeah, in my final form.
exactly. No, yeah, exactly. And we're in this particular form of liberalism, uh, and everyone complains about it being so silly and so ungrounded and so just causing very strange characteristics in people that it takes hold of the minds of. But then you have to rewind back and think, well, it didn't just come out of nowhere. It has some sort of grounding of a given place and a given people from maybe from a given time as well. But it obviously it lends itself to the culture of a people of a certain place, and most certainly the theology of a certain place. I mean,
Yeah.
it's definitely theology.
Oh yeah.
Uh, probably more so than anything else, to be honest,
Oh yeah.
because
I'd agree.
because culture or cultural assumptions such as that in liberalism don't feel the need to with such force to with such passion to spread themselves throughout the whole world without there being some sort of divine notion about them. That's just there's just no other way. I mean, you've heard people basically the let slip the strange phrase like sacred democracy and
Yeah. Our
and
sacred institutions.
someone did say something about priests recently, didn't they? Was it someone
Unironically?
something about priesthood
Huh.
and people who are uh, people who are saviors of democracy. I don't know,
Yeah,
something quite canonical or
yeah.
something like that.
Sometimes you get the hooded priests, and sometimes you see a tentacle
Yes.
or two move around where the face should be. Yeah, yeah.
Oh dear. Yes. Oh dear. But and so loads of people now, particularly people who are conservatives, people who are interested in more kind of grounded existence, people who are interested in more restrained and um, existence that pays more tribute to local culture and all this sort of stuff. Basically, more restrained existence will, have quite critical things to say about this thing called liberalism. And a lot of the time, I don't think they've been very good, these criticisms. There was that book by Patrick Deneen called "Why Liberalism Failed," which I haven't read in full, but I've just heard some snippets of it and also read some reviews of it, and I just get the impression that these books are just quite mistaken in what it is they're actually, well, particularly Deneen, they're quite mistaken in what or quite misguided in what they think they're actually talking about, or what is the thing that they are actually against. And a particularly telling thing is that apparently with Deneen's book called Why Liberalism Failed, he was actually obliged or advised by a peer reviewer, a peer who read like a draft or something, to say, maybe you should actually define liberalism. And he doesn't do that.
Yeah, it's
So
really
he never
important to define
defined
your
it.
terms.
He never actually defined liberalism, and he didn't even after the advice of a peer reviewer. And
Strikes
I'm
me.
obviously
Yeah,
it's not easy to define liberalism,
no.
but certainly if you're going to write a book about it, you might try.
Yeah,
You might at least try.
it strikes me as, I'm not saying it's the same, but the dynamics of these critiques of liberalism, not that there's not good ones, I think there are some good ones out there, but yes, a lot of them devolve into sort of cringe territory, I think, in a very similar way that you hear people on the left call everything they don't like is fascism. It's like, okay, or everything, everything is fascist, everything is white supremacist, whatever, and these terms just start
Sure.
losing any sort of real meaning, and then you're like, it becomes sort
Certainly.
of a bugbear that you can point to and go, see, it's the bad thing over there.
Sure.
And I think
Sure.
that
So,
maybe is
certainly
what we're getting to here. Yeah.
certainly with fascism, these people that talk about fascism like that, they fascism actually means something, and it
Yes.
means
Real.
something in the context of a very specific region of
Yeah.
Europe and specific people and specific ideas.
Yeah.
And fascism is not very abstract.
No.
In fact, it was the reason it was very thrown together
Yeah.
to deal with some absolutely chaotic times in Europe at the time, and for that reason, even if Hitler had won, or if Mussolini had won, if the Axis powers had won, probably fascism would not have lasted very long.
No.
Especially since very similar political arrangements to fascism, like I don't know, somewhere like Taiwan,
Yeah.
after the retreat. First initially after the retreat to Taiwan was, quite dictatorial, but I don't know the full ins and outs of whether there was outside pressure that caused Taiwan to reform itself in the way that it did, but it seemed like there's also South Korea as well. South Korea was quite dictatorial. It's probably not actually fascism, because obviously fascism does mean something specific, but
and I think we've pointed out on this, I think one of the episodes I did with my good friend Elliot on this show, it was quick to point out that what was one of the main mottos of the Italian fascists? me ne frego, I don't care, which is maybe an insight into this thrown togetherness of what it was. It's like, yeah,
Sure,
it was thrown
sure.
together and
Well,
nobody really cared.
it was it
Yeah,
was a terrible. I mean, it was a terrible time in
right.
Germany, and for whatever reason, I personally, I'm still sort of figuring this out. I think I'm less sympathetic to just the you know the idea that the sums in the sums in the peace treaties were so big. I don't think that itself is something that needs much uh, attention, but there was clearly just absolute chaos that people would have, really wanted to find something, some sort of order to
Yeah.
get back. And so for that reason, it's not a set of ideas that has such a long view
No,
of
no.
world. But anyway, sorry, we're digressing a bit.
But anyhow, yeah.
So yes, so that's similar to the way people are talking about liberalism, like Patrick Deneen or God, what's his name? Fucking Sohrab Ahmari. Yes, he's very
Yeah.
obnoxious and stupid.
Yeah, the
God.
compact mag. I confess I do
Yeah,
enjoy
yeah.
listening to him, but yeah, yeah, I have also been attempting to suss out or make an educated guess as to how he defines this thing he's railing against, aka liberalism, and it seems to be something like degeneracy. And I'm like, well, degeneracy is not the same thing as liberalism, right? Like degeneracy you can find in all sorts of systems, but like this is a particular
Sure,
kind of system you're talking about. You probably should define it a little better. So maybe
sure.
do
Well,
you want
and
to,
also
but
if you look at Compact magazine or just some of his articles from 2018 or something, you'll have him talking about the concern of illiberalism. So you have him lamenting this thing called illiberalism, which is about sort of free speech stuff.
yeah,
So it's him talking like a kind of normie, classical liberal type person, neoliberal type person, but he's, I don't know, some reason he's had this staunch epiphany and decided to go very much on the offensive of, and I think that's just a little suspicious if most of your motivations are just
yeah.
very happens so because of some very 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 fast change that you in your opinions that you had, especially since some really weird things in his books, in his book called The Unbroken Thread. He tried to kind of portray there being this sort of unbroken thread of significance between uh, Augustine and Andrea Dworkin. Andrea Dworkin being, a radical second wave feminist who, you know, made all these cliched statements about how much she hated men, and simply because she didn't like pornography, or she, as in she had moral objections to pornography and prostitution, but simply on that basis, he's trying to portray some sort of some unbroken thread between you know Andrea Dworkin and some significant figures of the history of Christianity. It's just absolutely absurd.
It's pretty absurd.
Absolutely absurd. I don't understand how anyone could take this person seriously, trying to even think this. Just it's insane. Some
So I guess
yeah,
maybe the next thing would be for us today would be just very briefly, and again, it's difficult to do it in a short period of time, but like I guess I'll
sure.
ask you, how would you define liberalism?
Well, how I would like to define it is, obviously different from how it is or what it is, but how I'd like
So,
to define
so
it is
the the
is is
the
uh
the mischief Anglo version. Yeah, it's
well,
very
how I'd
Anglo and
like
it's full of mischief. I don't know.
how how I'd like to define it is the greatest expansion of uh, opportunities for proprietorship in a population.
Okay.
That's how I'd like it to be defined, because and that's a bit vague, but it's also helpfully vague because what is proprietorship can mean, general things about private property, but also the proprietorship is also what you the sort of duty of owning a thing, whether that's a piece of land or some physical object, or maybe even, you know, a kingdom or a polity, having some sort of stake in it, and
Yeah.
having that as kind of a defining characteristic of sort of political significance, I suppose. And that as a framework, not as something that can define every minutia of life, because you know it can't, but some general thing about expansion of proprietorship to the greatest number of people. And so yeah, something that's defined around private property rights.
Oh yeah.
But
You're,
it's quite clear that
you're talking my language here. Yeah, I mean the whole idea of
sure,
ownership. I mean, this feels almost very hoppy in the private governance and private ownership.
sure. No, yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not I'm not fully on board with the Hoppian way of things, because I do think it's a little bit abstract and a little bit
No, yeah. But
it's,
as a
it's a little bit it's a little bit utopian.
oh,
And
for sure. Oh, for sure.
it's based on some principles that I think are kind of uh, have similar ancestry with what I call progressivism, or what I think progressivism is defined by, because obviously that's a word that gets thrown around a lot, but I like to treat it as having a specific meaning. And this abstract way of things is what liberalism has become to define, certainly after after the end of the 19th century. What is called liberalism came to be defined by something quite different, very much different from, you know, the primacy of private property.
Yeah, I think it was to borrow a term from religious studies, since let's be fair, liberalism is kind of a religion.
Mm.
It seems to have been spiritualized a bit, where away from like the concreteness of like, you have like you said, you have a stake, you're a proprietor as who's part of this broader society, you have a stake in it, you have responsibilities. It became something like human rights in general, and then like it sort of now seems to mean like maximum freedoms for maximum number of people regardless of consequence, something like that.
Well, it certainly became abstract in the sense that the proponents of liberalism of the time, of this time we're talking about, then became the you know, the people behind all these very international projects, whether they are the League of Nations, the United Nations, the World Bank, this, that, and the other. So very much this this redefining of what it means to be liberal is something that is more abstract, more groundless than before, which had some more in the 19th century that was fundamentally more bourgeois.
Yeah.
Which is a term that I think is a good sort of positive descriptor, or maybe an ironic one. But what the word bourgeois comes to mean is someone that sees virtue in proprietorship, but also someone that has a constrained view of the world, a materially constrained view of the world. That's fundamentally what the word bourgeois comes to mean in the most general sense. In the that's the best way of defining it in a way that most people use the word in a modern context, because obviously it can be used to describe loads of different things. The word bourgeois, like, it can actually mean what it is, the sort of, you know, rich merchants, capitalists who live in, you know, luxurious places, or it can, you know, in China during the Cultural Revolution, bourgeois habits were just any dated Chinese pastime that peasants were still engaging in, like going to tea houses and playing chess. And you know, teenage red guards would come up to them and, you know, knock their tables over and things like that, and tell them that they're engaging in bourgeois habits. You know, this is a very strange word.
Yes.
And strange, but in a way that I think should have some kind of positive association put back onto it.
I would very
So
much
it's
agree. Yeah.
so because what the best way of kind of defining that word in a way that all its different usages uh, sort of conform with is just any constrained view of the world, any sort of materially constrained view of the
Yeah.
world, and that that's also what the word fascist has come to mean. Just anyone with the slightest
Yeah.
constrained view of the world, where anyone with where not everything about the world is just these completely abstract principles that are
Yeah.
just fraudulent and
It
completely ungrounded. And
it has nothing to do with mid-century Italians anymore. It really doesn't,
well,
because
no, most definitely not.
yeah,
No, yes, exactly.
yeah,
Um, but also more back to this kind of topic of grounded liberalism. So it's funny how when people talk about liberalism or talk about the modern world and the West and how things are going wrong, and they don't feel the need to compartmentalize the West at all, to just see the different ways that people are still doing. Obviously, there's a lot of conformity in the whole world, but also in the West. There's lots of similarity, and there's lots of mindsets that can easily infect anyone else in the sphere of influence. Like, during the George Floyd protest, there were people protesting in Vienna.
yeah,
It was insane. So obviously there is some kind of shared burden on there, but nevertheless you can still compartmentalize, and you can, you know, notice differences that might be helpful for kind of you know, getting some insights into what is helpful. And Switzerland is an interesting one because it is very democratic, but democratic in a way that is genuinely more organic. For example, local policies can sometimes be decided on just by virtue of people turning up to in person to one of the public, uh, you know, government buildings or something, and raising their hands for yes and not raising them for no, something like that. That's still the way that laws are actually decided in Switzerland. And it's unprecedented to think that today, because I guess it assumes some sort of very high trust society, as it
yeah,
were, or maybe some sort of low, not necessarily low immigration, well, sort of that, but that links into some sort of, yeah, to some sort of high trust
yeah.
society. And but that itself might be considered liberal. And
Right.
if we're just going to condemn liberalism, because obviously condemning liberalism also generally means condemning democracy, and the democracy question, as it were, is a whole can of worms, which
Yeah.
we can delve into, of course. But
Well, I don't know. That would probably be best if it's
people
a separate episode, probably, for that, because
people
they're connected, but I
mm,
don't see them as the same thing. Even though I think what you're pointing out is that most people view them as interchangeable. I don't necessarily see that,
sure,
but yeah,
sure. Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I'm because I don't necessarily believe in some just universal denunciation of democracy, because clearly what is democracy, as I was saying before, what is democracy is something that didn't just come out of nowhere. It developed out of um some sort of actual process of thought from some certain people in a certain place, and it wouldn't have just developed with no sort of positive utility whatsoever. I mean, maybe some people would want to argue that these particular places where what we call democracy came about, and it was still a bad thing, that they were badly mistaken in their view of implementing this system called democracy. But I don't believe it can be. I don't believe there is no, or has never been, any positive utility for what might be called democracy. So it's obviously, it's obviously wrong when what is called democracy is created into an abstract concept that is just put anywhere that can just be put anywhere in the world, because obviously that has failed
oh yeah,
monumentally. And
yeah,
it's perfectly legitimate to criticize democracy as an abstract concept, because obviously it's a lot of places it's a joke,
Oh yeah.
basically. It's a
I
complete
think,
joke.
yeah, I mean, I think my sort of stance on it is that democracy, if it's going to work, it has to work in certain cultural contexts.
Sure.
And that implies that in others it won't. I see
That's not
democracy as in a
sure.
more of a utilitarian way. I think I don't see it as I don't see democracy as a good in and of itself. I also don't necessarily see it as a bad. It's just it's like it's a structure, and if you
Well,
have a culture that has certain values and respects certain things, I think, yeah, I'm not saying it can't work. I just, yeah, again, particularly like you've been pointing out, the big critique can be placed on trying to export it to places that just don't have
mm.
those cultural frameworks.
Not to say
Yeah,
not to say it's never been not to say it's never ever been exported successfully, but it
very rarely.
it is just assumed to be this great thing. And
Yeah.
it's impossible for it to really, it doesn't have utilitarian root. I'm not saying you're wrong in what you're saying, but I
I
think
meant
if
utilitarian like
people
in the I don't mean in like utilitarianism. I mean like in the like does it
sure
work? Like if it works,
sure
great.
no
If it
yeah
doesn't,
of
then it's
course
bad, right? Like it's sort of
yeah of
like,
course
like anything. Like
well
if it's
some
functioning,
some
great. If it's broken, it's bad. So
well
yeah.
what is democracy is clearly theological.
Oh yeah.
There's clearly some sort of idea of some divine legitimation behind the process. There must be some
I mean, yeah,
there must be just some divine element for people to really believe,
yeah,
to really speak of democracy in the way that they do. There must be some
yeah.
sort of divine aspect to it, which means
Divine
if it
divine right never left us. Never left us.
of course
It just got transferred. Yeah.
which if that's true, then it means, which is also true of its abstract form, that there is some sort of divine in in the process. But if that's true, then it means if you're trying to implement democracy elsewhere, you are sort of subverting the sort of religious divine notions that exist in whatever place that you're trying to import it into.
Yep.
So, but people don't think some people have started to some people because some people are ignorant of the fact that democracy is about some divine legitimation, as opposed to uh, thinking that it is just the most practical way of doing politics. That is often the most likely explanation that all people think. They just think that people will do democracy because it's practical. Then there are some people that start to think, well, if the legitimation it has is practical, then maybe we can demonstrate how here are some ways that it's impractical, and there are some ways that you could take away some democracy in order to create more prosperity. There is some book. There's one book written by a bloke who said 10% less democracy, more power to experts, or something like that. And then there's a woman called Dambisa Moyo. She's an economist. She's from Zambia, and she's written books about how poor countries should stop having their human rights records scolded, and instead should have more focus put on their prospects for economic growth and stuff like that. And like, I just think that because these people see democracy as something that has only come about because of practical utilitarian legitimation, which is not true, but that's what they think.
Yeah.
They then think, well, now if practicality is their legitimation, then that they can be made illegitimate by their impracticality. So these people it's like we're sort of reverse engineering a world that came before democracy. It's like we're reverse engineering traditional
Yeah.
understandings of politics. It's kind of silly and stupid, really. You see these. I mean, well, that's also basically the way the world works in the EU and stuff like that. Like they they have they have falsely thought that democracy has practical or utilitarian legitimation. Therefore, it's okay for them to just have all these big councils of, you know, technocrats and
This is, I mean, this is
endless legislation.
we could maybe even call this managerial democracy or something like that, to bring in
Something,
just
yeah, something like
a little bit of Burnham
some
there. Like, yeah,
yes, yeah, the managerial, yeah, and
yeah.
that is what I see as definitive of progressivism.
Yeah.
Because Woodrow Wilson is a very interesting case, because
Ugh.
obviously he was a
Ugh.
president, but he's the only president, he's the only US president to have had a PhD, and so
Worst
he's
president.
written.
Worst president.
Of course, I mean, yeah, of course he's terrible, but
Terrible.
but the fact he's an intellectual means that he's written his ideas down
Yeah.
in detail for us to actually look at, to actually get an idea of how his mind works compared to other presidents and stuff. And yeah, he spoke of sort of his own sort of theory of history, where there's the monarchical age, the democratic age, and the administrative age. And the democratic age, I'm assuming, is one that he associates with the classical liberal notions of property ownership as some sort of central virtue of society. The monarchical stage was the divine right of the rule of the best and the aristocracy and all that. And the administrative stage was a kind of further evolution where we would be basically managerialism, but not from a critical perspective, and where the ideas of private property is seen as not so central to or even democracy, to be honest, is not so because it just we've falsely attributed just practical utilitarian legitimation to these things. So because the same thing goes for private property as it does for democracy, their legitimation through, because fundamentally private property has legitimation through divine inspiration, but then people misunderstand and think that the only reason that we have private property is because of practical legitimation.
It works better.
But then of course people can say, well, if there's a time when it's shown that private property has been shown to be impractical, then it can be taken away because the foundation it lies on is shaky. So that's basically what progressivism means to me, the idea of misunderstanding the legitimation for these things.
So let's try.
I've talked so much. I'll stop for a bit.
Yeah, no, it's still very good, because ultimately this is an episode where I wanted to pick your brain about things. So then how would you, I mean, I don't want it to just be an interview, but I'm going to keep asking questions because it is interesting. So then how would you, using the framework that you just laid out, how, according to you, how then would you connect sort of the democracy or managerial democracy aspect and the progressive aspect to liberalism, at least as it's like connect that back to liberalism and then show how your liberalism is different from that, I guess, if that makes sense.
Sure. I won't be able to give the most refined answer because there is more I need to I do need to read more on the theory behind all this, but my current sort of working theory is that there was this redefining of what it meant to be liberal in the end of the 19th century.
Yeah, you see that with like Ludwig von Mises, right? He identified as, he's like, well, I'm a liberal. And of course, if you read Mises now, A, incredibly based, B, you don't think of him as a liberal. You're like, you call yourself a liberal, but you don't sound like, because, and I think that just as an anecdote, I think it shows you how much the definition has changed.
Well, these conservative people will criticize liberalism, and if they want to just criticize this completely general notion of liberalism, that's fine. But I think it will, if they don't at all do any sort of compartmentalizing of different eras and try and have a vaguely more specific points of reference, then I don't really see the point in taking these critics seriously.
I agree.
But my main sort of
history in order to critique any idea, you have to know where it comes from. and where it's like, and how it's changed over time. Yeah,
because
can't just-
clearly bourgeois morality and values about, you know, constraint, prudence, and, you know, living
love it.
within one's means, and
I love it when I love it when British people say constraint and prudence. And I'm like, yes, it sounds so much more real coming from you. Yes, if I were to say it, be like,
Sure.
whatever, Americans, when a British person says it, everyone's quiet. Anyhow, keep going.
I do my best, but the idea that, you know, you live in a sort of proprietary way, that you know, look after your domain, and you have prudence and restraint, and you know, that notion has died many deaths in the past century, and this notion was very much in accordance with liberalism in the 19th century, and now a very unconstrained notion of material existence in the world is taking place, and the idea that there's not some sort of external element that has caused that is suspect. I think there's some. My current theory is that there became more of an interest in particular German ideas over the course of the 19th century that culminated at the end of the 19th century. For example, Woodrow Wilson is often said to have worn out his German dictionary when doing a lot of his main writings about politics, and it's kind of surprising, because Woodrow Wilson grew up as, you know, a Calvinist and a very much, you know, a bourgeois liberal individualist type person. He grew up with all the expectations of the complete opposite of what he became to be. And so there's an interesting case there of maybe he is someone that, if he can have these very bourgeois liberal dispositions, but then he is someone that's also very taken by these progressive notions that are sort of the opposite of him, but for some reason he's just taken by them. Is there some sort of common essence between the bourgeois liberalism, the progressive liberalism, that people have not quite that need to try and explain? That's an interesting thing I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Right now. Do you understand what I mean?
No, I know. I yeah. So just to clarify, so
Yeah.
what you're saying is there, and you're asking the question, not answering it, right? Is there some seed of, I don't want to say of evil, but some seed of something? Is there a kernel inside that sort of older 19th century liberalism that under the right conditions can grow into, you know?
Is there some sort of common element? Some people would like to say, I've spoken to a few people who are like, I don't know, Roman Catholics or something, and they've said, oh yes, it's this, or
It's the Protestants.
Yeah. Maybe, yeah, well, yeah. I mean,
That
if there are some people
that's my favorite.
people,
That's my favorite cringe critique, that the Protestants gave us drag queen story hour. I'm like, that is, every time I see that, I laugh so hard, because it's basically a turtles all the way down argument. I'm like, the same logic can be easily wielded against you, because then you can get like sort of right-wing pagans who say the instant the Christians
Yes,
came along,
exactly.
everything. I'm like, so let's not, like, this is just, it's a ridiculous argument, but it also doesn't work very well
Yes.
as an argument. So yeah.
Well, it's the problem with that sort of stuff is everyone tries to basically rewrite the story of the Garden of Eden. So they rewrite the fall, and they find new ways of rewriting Eve eating the apple, which is not a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, if we're going to have these kind of, you know, turning point moments in history that are actually going to be practical, you should start with ones that are obviously most immediate. So
Right.
maybe people need, in my opinion, people need to talk more about the 1990s than, I don't know, than, you know, nominalism, because
15, 17.
clearly,
Yeah.
the nominalism is a big one, but
Yeah.
people need to talk more about more immediate points of reference that are actually practical for, because obviously there's not going to be, people are going to have so many different opinions on what was this turning point, what was this second Garden of Eden, fall of man type thing that often people just need to have more immediate points of reference, which then they can work back from.
Yeah,
I guess.
I would agree.
What was I saying?
So, oh well, I had
Sorry,
another.
Oh yes,
I had
yes.
another question. Oh yeah, go ahead. You go.
What was I saying before that?
It's the end of the week.
Yeah.
We're all tired.
Oh yeah. No, I'm quite tired.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, Woodrow Wilson and him being a Calvinist, because obviously he's a Calvinist, and Calvinism is also this thing that was prominent in Switzerland, and also is prominent. There's strong influence of Calvinism in France, which people think lends itself to the way that, because obviously France was an industrial powerhouse on top of it being this, revolutionary hellhole. It's still been an industrial powerhouse, which doesn't just happen for no reason.
Right.
And Protestant work ethic and all that. I've read Weber's Protestant work ethic, and there's a few holes in it, I think, but
we should do an episode on that. I've been wanting to do an episode.
Sure,
on that.
It's quite
I still have to finish it.
It's quite a lot to get around from it. I struggled a bit with it, but
his German is so it's good to read in German, but man, it's dense. His German's super dense. So
sure.
Yeah.
Well, most of these German writers were like that, weren't they? That's
yeah,
I
know.
I just
incredibly pretentious.
Yeah. I just think that these particular historicist ideas lend themselves quite strongly to progressivism as it developed towards the end of the 19th century.
Yeah.
Especially in America. I'm not saying that this is some absolute, we found the fall moment and everything is, I'm not trying to be so melodramatic about it, but there's something about these German historicist notions that lend itself to why people have come to speak with contempt in the 20th century of ideas relating to, constrained views of the world, whether that's about private property or even like you can see speeches by John F. Kennedy talking about doing the usual thing of, the founding fathers of America were working at a time that was relevant to then, and now this is now, and it's different, and blah blah blah. So I'm talking a bit too much about America rather than other places, but
Fine.
Although it is kind of,
we're at fault.
It's kind of a powerhouse, so of course.
Yeah. But we get it from you. I learned it from watching you.
But it sort of lends itself to that, I think.
Yeah.
These historicist notions that seeped into
I agree with you.
What it meant to be,
yeah,
to be liberal. And
I agree with you. I also as a
if you're going to have these blanket condemnations of liberalism without any sort of compartmentalizing by chronologically or geographically
is important too,
because it is interesting to sort of see the way the world is in different places, even at this late stage in the day. Obviously there are fundamentally most issues are quite common. I mean, the COVID lockdown stuff was a struggle, as it were, that was quite international, or the climate change stuff. That's something that is quite applicable to a lot of people around the world in the same way. And as I mentioned earlier, the Black Lives Matter crap, that was so international, it was so ridiculous. So there's obviously a lot to be said about an international struggle. God, I hate saying that, but of what we're up against.
As we've already determined on a previous episode, not with you, but on this channel, we've already basically determined that neocons are just Trotskyites, basically, in the end. So,
well, given that
neoliberals are pretty much in the same
ideas,
that's what they do.
Neoliberalism is worth talking about because it's also a very vague word. It doesn't have very many specific meanings, and
cringe boomerism. How about that?
it does. No, it does have a sort
Binge-boomerism,
of
it's basically what it is.
that's what it's become, certainly.
Yeah.
But it does have a kind of traceable sort of explicit origin. So obviously the word has this vague definition, and it's like by those who want to, because it came about originally as like a critique and as a
Yeah.
pejorative, and then very recently people started to reclaim it and all that. So it's a word that's gone to all these different usages, but fundamentally it lends itself to the ideas of Walter Lippmann
Yeah.
and his little conferences that he had of thinkers, where everyone was like, oh, look, there's all this communism and all this fascism, what do we do about it if we're liberals, etc. And what I see, based on this little snippets I've read of Lippmann, because he also wrote this book called Public Opinion, which is basically his idea that people in a democracy ordinary voters in a democracy can't be fundamentally trusted to vote the right way. So there must be some sort of scientific investigation as to how to manipulate the public, stuff like that. So that sort of lends itself to what I was saying before about these people mistakenly think that democracy has practical legitimation as opposed to divine legitimation, and so they try and reverse engineer pre-democratic what political structures and things like that. It's just quite funny, really. But on
That's
top of
very
that,
well said.
he was writing about economics, and he wrote, I pay homage to the ideas of Friedrich Hayek, and I also pay homage to the insights of John Maynard Keynes. So, which is like an interesting way. Yeah, I know, it's very stupid.
Laughter is the only appropriate response to that statement, but yes.
Well, it's so what it is like some sort of one of these Hegelian synthesis of
Yes.
of bourgeois liberalism and these,
Yes.
because Keynes was in full force by the time Lippmann was doing all this work.
Yeah.
And Keynes had sort of been in force as well. Well, he'd been in force for a while because obviously he wrote that book called Economic Consequences of Peace and stuff like that. But so Lippmann is a neoliberal forefather who's trying to kind of, hey, let's come up with a balance of these two worlds. And obviously, if that can be described as some sort of Hegelian synthesis, some sort of involuntary synthetic process of how we find compromise and all this crap, I don't like it. I don't think it's good. Well, clearly it's not been very good for the world.
Well, and you're in good company here, because at this show we are big time Hegel disrespecters. So we do not like Hegel here. So yeah.
Well, no, but it's more Hegel's claim that this is an involuntary process of how people come to.
I just don't like Hegel in general.
Oh no, yeah,
his ideas and him.
But sure.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
But it's like, but obviously when he was talking about synthesis and thesis antithesis, and he was claiming that to be some kind of involuntary process, and this seems to be that sort of process. Not that I think the people were actually kind of following Hegel's words or anything, but it seems to sort of be like that. And I just think, are we constantly getting these syntheses of slightly old versions of liberalism with new ones to get to this point that we are now? I don't really think that's a good, if that's what's happening. I don't really like it. It certainly is not.
Well said.
If it's true that that's what neoliberalism is, this kind of Hegelian synthesis.
Yeah.
I don't of bourgeois ideas, because obviously neoliberalism, as it was characteristically in the 80s and stuff like that, has some very bourgeois notions about it, but clearly it was of a different essence to how it was in its original form, because it's obviously a different time, different people, different, well, not necessarily different places, but
yeah.
And there wasn't, so they couldn't retain everything of the notions they were trying to emulate, whether they were, I don't know, Margaret Thatcher or Ronald Reagan or whatever. They couldn't fully retain all the things they were trying to do, so they were making some synthetic compromises with the progressive notions that they came before that, whether that's Keynes or, in the context of Britain, the the labor movement and the social democracy welfare state that had come about and all that jazz. And it's some sort of compromising synthesis that what is neoliberalism, and that's why it shouldn't be celebrated so much, because even today you have the self-described neoliberals, because the self-described neoliberals are a very recent phenomenon, and you have them literally talking about property rights and saying property rights aren't good because they're good because they make us happy. So they've all misunderstood the divine legitimation of these things, and making them practical. And of course, if someone says that property rights are good because they make us happy, well, if property rights can be demonstrated to make us unhappy, which anyone can do if they argue strongly enough, then clearly that's a legitimate reason to discard property rights. So it's obviously it's a shaky foundation.
Yep.
But so yeah, neoliberalism has this silly foundation.
Do you think since you're the token Brit, I will ask a token British question. Do you think liberalism works outside of an Anglo context?
Well, I think it has. I mean, I think it's been very successful in places like Hong Kong and Singapore. Obviously, there are
sorry, I'll rephrase the question. No, keep going. I mean, yes.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
But you know what I mean. We were never there. Yeah, no, but you know what I mean. Okay. Expound. Keep going. I'm just kidding. Yeah.
Well, no. Well, yeah. There are some places it does work, but depending on how much people wanted to receive it, because Hong Kong is a very interesting history. I've sort of been reading about it recently, and because it's different in Hong Kong compared to India or these other colonized places, and it's with America it's a little different because obviously there's mostly descendants of European immigrants, and
right. Yeah.
Then you have, but then that's the thing why it was so controversial to have Italians come in, Italian immigrants, and then have them considered white, and all that. But the fact that there is a misunderstanding of the abstract, there's a misunderstanding of democracy as only working in not fundamentally being effective in the abstract, will always mean that it's not trustworthy when it's exported. It's too much of a risk most of the time. It'll only work in very compartmentalized ways and very sort of constrained ways, which is kind of the way it is with Hong Kong or something like that.
Yeah. I think that's this has been good. I think we'll definitely come back to this topic. I think I still remain more. I mean, I've been calling myself post-liberal lately, which does not mean anti-liberal. It does not mean illiberal. It just means like I'm over it. And similar to sort of postmodern or postmodernism, right? Like you can exist in a pre-modern, modern, and postmodern state all simultaneously. And I think that's the same thing with liberalism, at least for how I'm viewing it. I mean, I think I'm looking to what's coming next. I recognize that liberalism did some really good things. I also recognize that it did some really good things for very specific reasons, which I think is what sort of our big point of this episode, which is it was grounded in a certain kind of cultural framework, particularly Anglo or Anglo-American, framework coming out of a common law tradition with a usually Protestant mindset usually from people who shared a common language, even if they were in different parts of the world or had different political allegiances. And I see it has done some good things in that context. I can't really, it's hard for me to really stay on board the liberalism cart just because I I don't doubt that it's, and I don't deny that it's done good things. I just don't know if you can, I still question how much it can be saved. But this has actually been really good because you make some very cogent arguments of maybe ways in which it could potentially be regrounded or replanted
Sure.
in a sense, like
I
like you said, in a local place within like with like a real sort of a non-globalist kind of liberalism. So you provide
Sure.
a good
I,
challenge to my doubts. I still remain skeptical,
sure.
but it's good to be
I
true.
no. I so well. I haven't really got much onto what I think about the prospects of revitalizing stuff like this, which
Yeah,
I also think is difficult.
yeah,
I certainly very difficult because most people conventionally will hear of liberalism and they will immediately think of uh what liberalism is today, which is this
right.
very mad thing, whatever it is, this mad horrible thing, and they won't really want to give any benefit of the doubt to people who want to try and reclaim it, especially since they will also think, well, you tried to reclaim liberalism with neoliberalism, with Margaret Thatcher,
Right.
and not and most people will have a conventionally negative opinion about people like Margaret Thatcher or Ronald Reagan. And I'm not here to say that these people, that Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, all the things they represented were blameless, but I think they are over. People have quite an irrational hatred of these, dislike of these people. But just the fact that they existed in their time and now down the line things haven't improved is entirely in the way that they might have wanted them to, because in Britain then we got Tony Blair, and of course in America you got Bill Clinton and George Bush and all this other crap.
The
So
Bushes and the Clintons. Yeah.
yeah, so clearly the precedent set by these active neoliberals, as they are called. I mean, I don't think they might have called themselves that, although I'm not saying it's entirely a world away to call them that, but so people will immediately have a lot of hesitation of an idea of wanting to rebuild liberalism because they just have a lot of misgivings about past attempts to do that, or just liberalism in general. So the idea of trying to just revitalize these notions of the liberal notions that I'd rather liberalism was defined by, like proprietorship and prudence and um just a more kind of grounded existence is difficult, especially since it's very much hampered by the way that the modern state works, especially when it comes to money and finance and monetary issues, because of the way the stability of money is very important in
Yeah.
in complementing the restrained way that people live lives. Like it's,
And this
for
is a
example,
point. Yeah. This is
because
a point
people
that,
talk.
oh, go ahead.
So sorry, you go.
Yeah, this is a point that we've been making to with me and my other collaborator Elliot, that one of the biggest ways where I think modern American libertarians go wrong is that they're steeped in Austrian economics, which is great, but the issue is that the Austrians are reacting in a context of a completely different monetary context to what we have now, and so while really on point for their time, to bring back to this notion of invest of judging movements and thoughts, streams of thought in their time period, that the Austrian economists are they're right, but the problem is the world, particularly the monetary world, doesn't work that way, and so it's really hard to use them in any meaningful sense aside from saying, isn't this horrible? It's hard
Sure.
to solve this using their theory. And that, I think, at least I know that this is a episode on liberalism, not libertarianism, but obviously libertarianism comes out of liberalism. It comes out of a liberal mindset. And I think the critique for me of both holds. It's not that they don't have good things in them, it's that they're like they're stuck in a different time period, and like things have moved on, and you have to adjust to react. And if you haven't adjusted, you can't react. You can't do anything. So
Sure. I mean, well, specifically on thing about Austrian economics, they obviously, there's a whole branch of thought devoted to finance as well as economics in Austrian. They tackle both subjects because the two subjects, economics and finance, are both, they are both technically distinct things.
right,
They are not the same thing.
but you hear what I'm saying.
No, yes, I do.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so yeah, because the way that money is, and the way the stability of money affects culture, and it affects economics, obviously, because economics is the arrangement of money, whereas the finance is the providing of the money, and those two things are different things. There's getting the resources and dealing with them in the right way. That's finance and economics. And so if the finance is screwed up, then obviously the economics and everything else that's dependent on the economics is screwed up as well, which is a thesis that's been put forward most definitively recently by a guy called Safdin Ammous. He's a Palestinian writer, and he's basically an anarchist, and some people might be put off by his anarchist tendencies, but he's not a libertine. He's passionate about people being able to build livelihoods, and he's passionate about the fact that having a better finance and better money means that you're more likely to raise a family and contribute to your own stake in society, and hence your what you pass on to the future. So clearly he's got a grounded despite being an anarchist of sorts. He's got this view of the world that is
he's read Hoppe.
Quite organic.
You can tell.
Sure, yeah, I've come to not fully be on board with the slightly abstract nature of Hopper and slightly utopian abstract nature of these ideas. But
that'd be a topic for a future episode, because I read Democracy that failed, and I'm like, this is the least utopian. The thing actually struck me was so great about it is it was unlike other libertarian writers. He was so
I'm not
utopian.
I'm not trying to say that in like a dismissive way. I'm just saying it as a there's no value. I have a very specific usage of that.
Yeah.
But this person, Safdin Ammous, has written books about money and the stability of money, how it affects basically everything, whether that obviously economics, but then it affects culture and society and health and all this stuff.
Environment,
and it's very
everything. Yeah, it's
very compelling. And his alternative is to maximize the utility of Bitcoin,
and is skeptical of that, but yeah.
That's another. I think there should be more serious consideration of just any prospects with Bitcoin. Obviously, cryptocurrencies in general are quite chaotic and silly, and this person, Safdin, he's very clear about how he thinks that there's nothing useful except in cryptocurrencies except Bitcoin. So he's obviously not, and he will point out how Bitcoin is different, which it is, because it's got a limited supply, and it has all these very sophisticated mechanisms in place to prevent the double payment problem, or whatever it's called. These general fraudulent acts, and it has something different about it.
Money is important too, and I think I agree. Obviously, I'm heavily influenced by the Austrians in this respect. That money, the connection between money and culture. I think, though, I don't know if we can look to Bitcoin to save us. I think it takes something.
Sure. No. Yeah.
Genuine. I think
I was.
Yeah. It takes something.
I was about to say.
Yeah.
Sorry, Karen.
Yeah.
Sorry, Karen.
Go ahead.
I was about to say there's obviously going to be natural difficulties with getting people to be on board with this, or
And
just
I
the
do think it's kind
practicalities
of
of
a self-selecting problem too, where the people who are most likely to get on board with something like Bitcoin are the ones who already display low time preference in their lives, usually. And so it's sort of like I do think it's more of like moths being drawn to the light. Like the reason you're interested in this is because you already have these tendencies.
I think
I don't know if Bitcoin can convert, like, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like Bitcoin can't change your heart. It can maybe make society more stable. It can make money more stable, maybe, you know, and I'm not against that. But I
it
think
certainly
it doesn't ground you in that in the same way that like having, like you were to start, like when we were starting out the episode, having a real connection to a liberal tradition that's grounded in a time, place, culture, language.
sure.
I think that's a lot, that is, if you were ever going to be able to save liberalism or correct it or save its course, whatever you want to call it, it would have to be done that way. And you know, maybe the money would be part of it. Definitely would be part of it. But
Sure.
yeah. So that would just be, yeah.
I definitely concede it's very far off to. I mean, well, Bitcoin currently is not something that can, you know, as in the form that it's currently used, will, you know, make your life better, because it's not actually used as the basis for a monetary system.
You might as well carry around Kruger rants and try to buy groceries with
it would be,
yeah.
Well, it's then you can't purchase things with it, but you can. Yeah. The point is that you can put your money into it, and fundamentally it does. There is some, I would argue, there is some legitimate utility in Bitcoin in storing value, which I could, you know, go into a lot of detail about, and probably be controversial statement and all that. And
sounds like a good topic for another episode.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I've done, I've looked at data for this and to sort of back this up, and and what was I going to say? I forgot what I was going to say. Oh my god,
that's fine. Hey, yeah. I think, yeah, no, this has been I think again, it's late for you, and it's you know,
oh yes, it's a little
British winter's getting to your, it's addling your brain. You need to, whatever it is you people do, drink some brandy and tea or whatever it is, and eat a crumpet. I think, yeah, no, this has been good.
Sorry, just yes, I remember something. So
okay. Yeah.
So yeah, so Bitcoin people who use Bitcoin do genuinely know that it's not actually, you can't really use it to make quick bucks. Yeah. Obviously there are other cryptocurrencies that are designed for that, or people use for that, but if people are to make gains out of it, it will mean that you've had to have held it for like several years. So it's clearly,
the time preference of Bitcoin is definitely low.
So yeah, so people don't use it, specifically Bitcoin, with expectations of quick bucks, because it's just not the way it works. So
yeah,
so that's I'm obviously going to understand if people are skeptical of it, but I would then simultaneously encourage people to have skepticisms of the way the current financial system works, and, you know, then have a more balanced view of the differences in the prospect of these things. But because, yes, I think people need to have more of a critical eye on the way finance is, and the way finance is today is, can it be described as liberal? Well, not liberal in a way that's prudent. If
that's,
well, yes, of course.
That's
you know,
yeah, go ahead.
If prudence and, you know, constraint are what defines liberalism, which I would like them to be, but obviously people disagree, then of course the way finance is today is very much not that, because you know, people just print money all the time for essentially every mortgage out there is basically just printed. Like there's no fundamental necessity for it to be for most mortgages to be backed by anything. So
well, so I think what
I've
we've learned here is that
Yeah.
yeah, maybe perhaps progressivism is the real illiberalism. Who knows?
sure. I mean,
Yeah, I think
it's
yeah, I think
it's
yeah,
a hard it's sort of hard. I'm not going to just sort of say these things and just say, oh, if you don't agree with my thesis, you're a a dingbat. But there needs to be some serious acknowledgement of compartmentalizing liberalism chronologically, at least chronologically, and maybe geographically as well.
Yeah.
But especially chronologically, and especially regarding the turn of the 19th century.
I would
This
agree.
is if we are going to have these big reckonings with the legacy of liberalism, like in the vein of a Patrick Deneen or something, then you do need to have more specific points of reference, and it's
I'd very much agree.
as opposed to just sort of throwing up your hands, and because obviously it's fun to just despair at everything, and that's I totally sympathize with that view of just despairing everything, but it's not. But that's like a temporary measure, and then eventually you've got to roll up your sleeves and get down to business. And so, yeah,
I think that's a good place to end it.
Mm.
Before I
Sure,
let you go,
sure.
do you have any projects you'd like people to hear about? Where can they follow you? What kind of stuff are you doing?
Well, they can follow me on Twitter, and I have some. I've been neglectful of my work at the moment because I've had these things come up in my life that have
Life happens, folks.
been in the way. Life
As
happens,
John
and
Lennon
it's
once said, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. And that is very
oh
much true.
God. John Lennon, of course. No,
Hey,
I've life has been happening a lot, and I have this written thing in the works. I'm hopefully going to
cool.
publish this
Well,
month.
whenever
Yes,
you
my main
let us know whenever
thing is
whenever
Twitter.
it gets closer, and we'll let people
Sure,
know about
man.
it.
Sure, man. Yeah. Thanks.
Y'all can follow me on Twitter at Altphilologe. Yeah, I know it's a German thing, but a German handle, but I'll put it in the I'll type it out in the description so you can copy and paste it if you want to hear me rant about, I don't know, Tolkien and Kierkegaard and liberalism, things like that. One thing too, I just wanted to point out or let people know, I'll put it also in the description. I recently wrote I've been turning some of these podcast episodes into blog articles, sort of distilling them down into blog articles over at Carpe Forum, and Fred also knows Carpe Forum. He's a Carpe Forum person. And I just did a new one over the Thanksgiving weekend about sort of the Time War episodes that me and Elliot have been doing. So I'll link that in the description if anyone's interested. It's got GIFs and sci-fi references, and it's very extra, and people have been liking it. So that's what I've been up to. And I'll probably be doing more of those little blog spin-off, spinning off podcast episodes into blog articles. People tend to like those. So I'll keep doing that. And with that, I wish everyone a great rest of your day wherever you are, and have a nice weekend. And Fred, we should have you once life stops lifing so much for you. We should have you back on.
Of course.
We'll do more.
Of
We'll
course.
do more liberalism, and we'll neoliberalism. We'll do more Bitcoin and all those kinds of things. Sound good?
Sure, man. Sure, yeah.
Thanks. And yeah, everyone, like, comment, subscribe, please. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Peace.
Bye.